since even before I can remember. I've seen a man's face whenever I look through a window. My mom loves to tell a story of when I was 3 or 4 at my grandma's house. I called them into the room and asked, "Why is there an ugly face in the window?" My mom went and looked and assumed that I was seeing my own reflection. "That's you," she said. And then apparently I got mad and started crying. I don't remember this, but my mom thinks it's hilarious and loves to tell it as a cute, embarrassing story. I always felt a cold dread when she would tell it because I know that I wasn't seeing my reflection that day. I was seeing the man in the window. When I was a little girl, I thought he was old. But once I started to get a little older myself, I decided he looked to be in his late 30s to mid 40s. He had dark blonde hair with a little touch of gray in it. Usually his hair was down to his shoulders or pulled back in a ponytail, but sometimes it's cropped to his ears, and once or twice I've seen him with a buzz cut. He's almost always wearing glasses. He usually has a patchy beard, kept cropped short, though I've seen him clean shaven before. Even though little cosmetic changes happen from time to time, it's always the same man, and he always has a gaping, bloody hole in his face. It's above his eye, just near the hairline. The hole is black with clotted blood, and red is smeared down his face. His left eye doesn't open all the way due to the blood and deformation around the eye socket. Spatters of red flake his glasses, and his face is pale. Any real person with this injury would either already be dead or mere minutes from it. But he lives behind the windows, looking like a reflection superimposed on my own. Sometimes he's very close to the glass, and sometimes he's further away, but he's always watching me. I don't remember my mother's story, but I can remember seeing him from about age 5. By that time, I already understood that this wasn't normal and had also decided that this was a secret I could tell no one. My parents raised me in a pretty extremist version of Christianity, and anything that had even a hint of the supernatural besides church was considered demonic. As such, I had come to the obvious conclusion that the man in the window was a demon attached to my soul due to some heinous sin that lurked in my heart. I decided that this was a test and a judgment from God. I must pray and have faith that he would deliver me. I must repent of whatever sin had caused this demon to attach itself to me, and that I would do it alone, both out of conviction that this burden was mine to bear, and out of shame at my apparent lack of purity. You might think that these are pretty weird thoughts for a 5-year-old to have, but you don't know my family. Let's just say these weren't even the most fucked up religious ideas that had been placed in my head. But that would be another story. From around age 5 to 8, I remember being terrified of the man in the window. I would insist on having the curtains drawn in my room, especially at night. Like a reflection, he was easier to see when the outside of the window was dark. I tried avoiding looking at the windows. I prayed, I begged God to protect me, but nothing changed. He was always still there. Sometime around my tweens, the intensity of the fear began to wear off. He had never done anything to harm me. I was more afraid of what his presence said about me than his presence itself. I became more comfortable with windows, though I still kept the bedroom curtains closed at night and would cry when my sister would open them. At age 11, I was baptized in our church and received the gift of the Spirit, which means speaking in tongues. For those unfamiliar, this is for Pentecostals, the moment that you are saved. I remember feeling elated, thinking, surely now I must have been made clean and God will release me from the demon in the windows. When we came home that night, I only pretended to go to bed. Once everyone was asleep, I got up and spent the whole night praying. I praised God and I rededicated myself to Him over and over, and I reveled in my newfound salvation. I said, God is with me now. I rebuke the demon in these windows in the name of Jesus Christ. Then finally I pulled the curtain aside. He turned his head to look at me. A spurt of fresh blood washed down his face, plastering a streak of his hair to his cheek. He was very close to the window, looking intently at me before my eyes blurred with tears of disappointment and confusion. I thought that he also looked sad. The next day I was really sick. I must have caught something at the crowded church and it developed into pneumonia. My fever soared and I hallucinated that my bed was sloshing back and forth underneath me. For the first time in my life, I didn't pray. After I recovered, I began to think differently about the man in the window. Maybe he wasn't a demon. Maybe he was just something else. Instead of avoiding his gaze, I started to study him. Sometimes I talked to him when I was bored doing my homeschooling alone at the kitchen table. He still frightened me a little, but I suppose I just didn't have the energy to fight against him anymore. And if I was going to have to accept that he'd always be there, I might as well try to make peace with it. Around age 13 or 14, I think, I saw him with both short hair and no beard for the first time and was struck by how similar he looked to be my dad. A new theory bubbled up in my mind. Was he the ghost of some relative of mine that had attached himself to me? He wasn't any of the uncles or cousins I knew, but my dad had a fairly large extended family, some of which I had only met when I was too young to remember. I went to our family photo albums and flipped through. There I was, a chubby toddler in a white and green dress, scowling at the camera with my thumb in my mouth. Behind me was a veritable horde of family members lined up and grinning. I scanned all of the faces, and only one of them besides my dad had blonde hair, and she was a woman. No one matched the man in the windows. I asked my dad if he had any long-lost brothers or cousins that weren't in the pictures. He didn't know of anyone, though I wasn't sure he was trying that hard to remember. He asked why, and I said I was thinking about trying to do a family tree is all. So that was a dead end. I still felt pretty sure that I must be close to the truth, but I didn't know how else to pursue this. We didn't live close to any of Dad's family anymore, and even if we did, I wasn't sure what I would even ask. Are there any blonde men in the family who died of gunshot wounds to the head? I didn't really believe myself to be demon-possessed anymore, but everyone else would think I was if I showed up with a question like that. Besides, around this time, something else was beginning to take up space in my mind. Another secret, another sin. Something so shameful and disgusting that I was not able to fully acknowledge it even to myself. But refusing to give it words didn't make it go away. And it gradually began to eat away at my mind and my heart. I spent hours in the bathroom with the lights off, crying into the sink. I pinched my arms and banged my shin against the toilets. To raise bruises, I lay in the dark with my pillow over my face and wondered if I could somehow suffocate myself and never wake up. And sometimes I'd look at the man in the windows with the gaping hole in his skull and I'd think, I wish I was you. When I was 19, I was alone in the house. I knew where my father kept his firearms. He had bought several because he was paranoid that, quote, Obama is going to make guns illegal. He wanted all of us to know where they were hidden. I got his handgun and carried it to my bedroom window. I looked at the man. He was watching me as always. I raised the gun and pointed it to my head right above my left eye, and like him, it seemed right. But then I saw him lunge for the window. His glasses slipped off his bloody, slick face as he pressed a hand against the glass. I could see him, eyes wide, mouthing words, pleading with me. No! He was saying silently through the invisible wall between us, no, please. Slowly I lowered the gun. Tears came in a flood, adrenaline and exhaustion, shaking my body violently. I pressed my head against the cold glass, wishing I could hear his voice, but glad he was there all the same. I ugly sobbed. There was snot dripping from my nose, and my face was red, and I smudged the window with tears for I don't know how long. Whenever I opened my eyes, I could blurrily see him there, still with me, and that was just enough to keep me from picking up the gun again. Soon after that, with nothing but a couple of suitcases of clothes and a few cooking tools, I moved far away from my hometown and family and away from that handgun. Mentally, I was still not well, and the bruises on my legs showed it. But at least I had the distraction of a new job, new community, new friends to make, and a new way of life to help keep me moving forward, and also a good bit more alcohol to numb me up than was healthy, but I somehow managed to barely skate above the surface of a life-threatening addiction to it. The man in the windows was still with me, though he drew much further back from the glass after that day. For years and years, I could barely see him unless the night was very dark and the lights in my bedroom were just right. I had taken to calling him John Fenster. Fenster is window in German, if you didn't know. I was no longer afraid of him. I thought him as a silent and strange secret friend. I could go for days, then months without really thinking of him or about him, but whenever I'd remember and check, he was still there, faint and distant, still watching me. So it was to him that I first finally admitted my great shameful secrets that had almost taken my life when I was 19. The first was, I think I'm falling in love with a woman. And years later, the second was, I feel like I'm a man. I don't think really that he could hear me. I just assume that I was just as silent to him as he was to I assume I am just as silent to him as he is to me, but being able to say it to someone was the first step to the gradual loosening of a cord that was tightly bound around me, a cord that I hadn't realized was so close to crushing me. I began dating my close friend Jessica. I cut my hair short and started going by a new name. My family was shocked. They begged me to come home and talk it over, and I, wanting to trust that they wouldn't hurt me, foolishly agreed. Once I was there, they stole my keys and did everything in their power to trap me there. I won't go into detail about that awful December, but suffice to say I did escape. Leaving behind my childhood, all of my childhood photos, boxes of my artwork in the attic, old toys and mementos, my books and birthday presents, all of it just left behind. But I regained my freedom and I discovered my resilience. When I told Jessica that I wanted to transition, she smiled. I think you'll look great as a guy. And finally, the shame and self-loathing began to fade. I started to see myself as I really was, and I started to look forward to having a body that felt like my own. The urge to hurt myself became a distant memory, and my life began to be filled with joy. I wasn't sure what to expect from testosterone. A lot depends on your genetics. I found that my voice started dropping almost right away. But my appearance took years to significantly change. I didn't start getting facial hair until about 4 years in, and it was so sparse and straggly. But it was so sparse and scraggly that I kept it shaved until about year 7. But now it's finally filled in enough that it looks like it belongs on a mature man rather than a pubescent boy. I'm quite pleased with it. The blessing, but also the curse of testosterone, however, is that I started looking an awful lot like my dad. So I decided to grow my hair out long to try and fix it. And that did the trick, but as you may have already guessed, that's when it finally clicked. The man in the window has moved nearer to the glass again for the first time since I was 19, and there's no mistaking it. At age 37, I'm starting to get some flecks of gray hairs. My hair usually rests on my shoulders or is back in a pony. I wear glasses which slip down my nose when my face is damp or sweaty. He's me. The man in the windows with the hole in his head is me. And something is changing about the way he behaves, whereas before he moved entirely independently to me. Now he's begun to mimic my movements, almost like a reflection with a bit of delay. His appearance no longer changes as much. If my hair is down, so is his. If I take my glasses off, so does he. It's like we're syncing up. I think whatever happened to him is going to happen to me soon. I've been running possibilities through my head. I haven't had the urge to self-harm in a decade, so am I sure it can't be self-inflicted? So I am sure it can't be self-inflicted. Is it a deliberate murder or an accident? Will Jessica get hurt or my dogs? When does it happen? Is there something I can do to avoid it? I don't think changing my appearance will work since I know he can change as well. The only thing I can think of is that he always appeared as a man. If I could somehow go back to being a woman, would that prevent it from happening? But that doesn't feel right. When I was 19, I almost died from the pain of hiding who I really was, and I, reached out through time somehow to save me. To show me that there could be a life worth living in the future. A life that looks like him. How can I go back? I can't. I'm scared that I'm running out of time. Might be a few years or might be a few days. I look into the window and I could see him looking back at me with intensity, struggling to keep his soul and eye open. It's like he's begging me to do something. He wants me to figure out how to change this. I swear I'm going to figure out. I swear I'm going to figure this all out. I'm gonna figure something out. I have to.